Good morning, metalheads of the internet, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Metal Meltdown. Today, by popular demand, and also because there isn't a lot of brand new music that's really exciting me, we're going to talk about every single studio album from the one, the only, Napalm fucking Death, one of my all-time favorite bands. I'm fucking pumped. I hope you're fucking pumped. Let's fucking go. First, a couple of ground rules and reminders. Just like every other video of this nature, I am not interested in EPs, demos, live albums, or compilations. I am looking specifically at Napalm Death's 16 official studio albums, everything from their debut Scum, leading up to their most recent studio album, Throes of Joy in the Jaws of Defeatism. This is not a ranked list, this is not a numbered list. Each album will be assigned a score out of 5, and we will be talking about them in order of release. With that in mind, let's officially get started with Scum, the band's debut album, released June 1st, 1987 via Earache Records. Arguably the first grindcore record ever made, definitely the most influential. It was chaotic, addictive, urgent, and poignant back in 1987, and it remains so now. A politically charged wrecking ball of extreme music, a Molotov cocktail of anarcho and hardcore punk, and crust and death metal and some crossover thrash influence. It's angry, it's violent, it's raw as fuck. For the most part, it's lyrically and conceptually still quite relevant as well, dealing with anti-corruption and fascism and the failures of capitalism. This album really opened my eyes to what grindcore, death metal, hardcore punk, and to what extreme music was really capable of the first time I heard it. I don't think it would be a stretch at all to say that without Scum, there is no Robert Walton. There is no Metal Meltdown. This is a massively influential record, not just on the development of underground and extreme music, but on me as a human being. And years later, I still love it. There's not a single riff, not a single beat, not a single chant or lyric or just in-your-face fucking assault that does not absolutely wow me and make me want to smash something. And one thing that stands out as being especially remarkable all these years later about Scum is that, really, when you think about it, it shouldn't work. And if any one element or component was altered or changed or removed, it probably wouldn't have. I mean, on top of the music itself, sonically and lyrically being so provocative and risque, the production timeline for Scum is confusing and weirdly complicated. To the point where, if somebody hasn't already, I could probably release a pretty thorough and lengthy documentary explaining everything that went into the creation and production and release of this record. But that is another story for another time. As far as I'm concerned, Scum from start to finish, despite everything, is a 5 out of 5 experience. This album was a masterpiece back in 1987, a masterpiece when I first heard it as a teenager, and a masterpiece now. A legendary, innovative, game-changing record that never fails to get the blood pumping, to get the muscles flexing, and to inspire people of all ages and creeds and nationalities and sexualities to just fuck shit up. It would not be totally unfair to suggest that in this particular instance I am a touch biased, nor would it be unfair to suggest that I am perhaps viewing this album through some kind of nostalgic lens. You're probably right, but I don't fucking care. Next up, we have From Enslavement to Obliteration, released September 16th, 1988 via Earache Records once again. This album is much more cohesive in comparison to Scum. The lineup doesn't change from track to track, the style is more consistent, the production is more consistent, and the music is admittedly a lot tighter as a result. The The lyrics are again dealing with anti-capitalism and materialism and anti-fascism, but we're also talking about slavery and animal rights and misogyny. Much like Scum from start to finish, it is filled with killer riffs and beats and chants and hooks. It is aggressive, it is uncompromising, but it is not quite on the same level as Scum. Despite in some areas being a better album, I think From Enslavement to Obliteration is brought down by significantly weaker production. More cohesive production, as I've pointed out, but weaker nonetheless. It's just not as punchy, it's just not as crisp, not quite as heavy and sonically impactful. Not for me, at least. Still, though, a great fucking record, no arguing otherwise. I still own it on vinyl, I still jam a lot of these tunes pretty frequently, and I would still happily give this album a very enthusiastic 4 out of 5. No, it's not as powerful as Scum, but it's kinda hard to be as powerful as Scum. I mean, that was almost a lightning in a bottle moment for, like, chaotic, extreme music, and From Enslavement to Obliteration does a pretty good job at least trying to recapture that lightning to its credit, while expanding Napalm Death's sound and approach and identity. Next up, we have Harmony Corruption, released July 1st, 1980 via Earache and Combat Records, and there are a lot of big changes for Napalm Death on this album. It is their first with Barney Greenway on lead vocals, it is their first with Mitch Harris and Jesse Pintado on guitars, it is their last with Mick Harris on the drums, and it also shows Napalm Death as a band sonically going in a direction more inspired by American, specifically Floridian death metal. There are some brief yet spicy grind-like passages and flourishes across the record, but all things considered, this has more in common with Dayside and Obituary than it does with the previous two Napalm Death records. Similarly to Scum, I can't help but get the idea that if one more thing had been changed or altered or removed, this album probably wouldn't have worked. I mean, there are so many different components to this record, so many moving pieces, so many new styles and sounds and ideas being brought in, and so many new members coming into the band. I mean, this is only Napalm Death's third album, but by this point, this is a completely different band than the one that recorded Scum, or for that matter, a completely different band from the one that recorded the previous record, From Enslavement to Obliteration. But Napalm Death are masters of their craft. They know what they're doing. They know how to navigate confusion and chaos, and as such are able to, against all odds, deliver yet another bona fide fucking classic through Harmony Corruption. The riffs are blunt yet razor sharp, beating you down yet slicing you into pieces with near surgical precision. The lyrics and vocals are intense, the percussion is dense and heavy, everything has that classic Scott Burns death metal sound production, thanks to Scott Burns actually working on this record, but there's a certain hellish intensity that also weirdly brings to mind some Slayer of the time. It makes for some of Napalm Death's tightest and most brutal material, including one of my favorite Napalm Death tracks of all time, Suffer the Children, which remains every bit as intense and poignant now as it was back in 1990. This is a 4.5 out of 5 for me. Incredible record from start to finish. Unfortunately, one of the few classic Napalm Death records I don't own on vinyl, but I look to change that very, very fucking shortly. Next up, we have Utopia Banished, released June 23rd, 1992 via Earache and Relativity Records. This album would come to cement the definitive Napalm Death lineup and sound for years to come, with a 50-50 fusion of classic grindcore and American death metal influence, a very beefy, bulky production courtesy of Colin Richardson. The album is very hostile, very abrasive, very in-your-face, very loud and sonically dense. And honestly, from a production standpoint, this album is way ahead of its time. Like, this is more akin to what I might expect of a grindcore band now than what I would expect of a grindcore band back in 1992. There's clearly a lot of time and money and effort being put into developing Napalm Death's sound and identity and aesthetic at this current moment in time. And while I do think the songwriting takes a little bit of a hit as a result, everything is pretty fucking heavy and pretty fucking satisfying nonetheless. Like, it's ultimately really hard to complain when the music is just this fucking ferocious. I mean, this thing sounds like a wild animal on drugs let loose in a fucking daycare center. For me, I'd give this thing a 4 out of 5. It occupies a territory similar to From Enslavement to Obliteration for me. Yes, it's a more cohesive and refined record, but I just prefer the previous one, plain and fucking simple. Next up, we have Fear, Emptiness, Despair, released May 31st, 1994 via Earache and Columbia Records, and it appears once again that there are some drastic changes being made to the Napalm Death sound and production and identity. No lineup changes this time, thank God for that at least, but the band is bringing in some subtle influences from the worlds of alternative rock, namely bands like Sonic Youth and Jane's Addiction and Helmet. The songs are getting more complex and obtuse, the production is very dense and loud and crisp, with a lot of resources being brought in from Columbia Records. It's not shocking at all to hear that there was a lot of pressure on Columbia to steer this album in a very specific direction as well, hence why Shane Embury has stated that this is his least favorite Napalm Death record. But you know, despite all of that, I honestly don't feel this is too drastic of a departure in sound or style from Utopia Banished, and more importantly, is filled with killer fucking tunes. I mean, there are so many great fucking songs, so many great riffs, so many great beats. The opening cut in particular, Twist the Knife, is another one of my favorite Napalm Death cuts. Honestly, I feel the same about this album that I did about Utopia Banished. I gave that a 4 out of 5, so I'm gonna give this a 4 out of 5 as well. Despite everything, I honestly think it's a great record. Maybe not perfect, and I can understand why it might not be Napalm Death's favorite, but it is a great record nonetheless, in my opinion at least. Next up, we have Diatribes, released January 30th, 1996 via Earache Records, and this is where the band ever so briefly lose my attention. I don't hate this record by any stretch, but the larger emphasis on what we are now calling groove metal is a bit of a turnoff. The songs just aren't as smart, they aren't as vicious. Napalm Death have lost a little bit of their urgency and luster by this point. The production isn't as strong. It's weird to say, but if you had told me that this is the album where there was a lot of like pressure coming down from major labels to create something more accessible or whatever, I'd probably believe you. I mean, even the album cover looks like something I could have pulled from some, like, underground alt-metal or groove metal band of the time. Like, there's just not really a lot that's really all that appealing about this record to me. I don't know, a couple solid riffs and jams here and there, but I'd have to give this a 2.5 out of 5. It's okay. It's fine. It's totally, completely inoffensive and acceptable, but I'll probably never listen to it again. I don't care, you know? I would actually say that this is probably my least favorite Napalm Death record, all things considered, so yeah. Sorry, guys. Can't win them all. Next up, we have Inside the Torn Apart, released June 3rd, 1997 via Earache Records, and this is a much better album than Diatribes. There's still a lot of influence coming in from groove metal and alternative rock, and when contrasted with some of the heavier influences, it almost unintentionally gives this kind of a nu metal vibe, but there is some more grind and death metal flavor coming back into the band as well. The songs are smarter, they're more catchy, they're more vicious, the production is stronger, I think. All in all, this is a much better execution of what I think Diatribes wanted and tried to do. Still not amazing, not my cup of tea overall, but I definitely enjoyed this over Diatribes. I would give this a 3 out of 5. I guess not an especially enthusiastic one, but hey, if you're looking for some jams, you will find them here. You just might have to sift through some semi-dated 90s alt and groove metal first. Just a warning. Next up, we have Words from the Exit Wounds, released October 26, 1998. This is considered the end of Napalm Death's experimental years. The alt-rock and groove metal influences are much more subtle on this record. There are some weirder soundscapes and atmospheric passages to be found, but for the most part, This is, I would say, a more straightforward kind of death grind record. Unfortunately, the songwriting itself just isn't all that engaging or exciting. I will argue that this is perhaps Napalm Death's most forgettable record, to the point where I'm really struggling to think of any, like, genuine highlights. But there's also, like, nothing I really avidly dislike about this thing. It's mostly just kind of an okay record. I listened to it, it exists, I gained nothing from it, but I lost nothing from having heard it. I guess I'll give it a 2.5 out of 5. It's totally okay. It occupies a territory much like Diatribes, where I'm like, I don't hate it, I don't love it, it exists, whatever. Next up, we have Enemy of the Music Business, released September 25th, 2000 via Spitfire Records. And finally, Napalm Death is back to doing, quite frankly, what they do best. Playing nasty, in-your-face, piss and vinegar grindcore with super political and socially relevant lyrics, killer riffs, killer vocals, dense production, all that shit. It is arguably a very derivative and run-of-the-mill record by the standards of Napalm Death, but at this point, I don't really care. I had a lot of fun revisiting this record, and after listening to the more mopey and experimental flavors of the last 3 records, I appreciated the more straightforward, classic grind of this album. I don't really have too much to say about it with that in mind. I'm just going to give it a 3.5 out of 5, and we'll move on to some slightly more exciting and ambitious records, because as much as I do like Napalm Death returning to just straight up fucking grindcore, it's hard to argue with some of the more high concept ideas that they would develop on some subsequent albums. Speaking of which, let's move on to Order of the Leech, released October 21st, 2002 via Spitfire Records. Oh my god, what a battering ram of just pure fucking brutality. I don't know if y'all remember, but the political climate in 2002 was a little weird, you know? This fun little thing called 9/11 had happened only a year ago. The United States is at war with Iraq. Things are starting to get a little violent, a little fucking crazy, a little fucking nuts, and Napalm Death taps into that energy with this record and makes some pretty fucking batshit crazy material. Tracks like Continuing War on Stupidity, The Icing on the Hate, Forced to Fear, and Farce and Fiction have aged remarkably, almost scarily well, considering, you know, the political climate of 2021 is itself pretty fucking weird and complicated. But more importantly, they're tight, they're heavy, they're violent, they're super in your face, and they inspire me, much like classic Napalm Death records, to just fucking destroy everything in sight. Honestly, it's a 4.5 out of 5 for me, and get ready to hear that number a lot, because quite frankly, Napalm Death in the 2000s just consistently fucking killed it. Consistently hit it out of the fucking park. Home runs with every fucking album. It is scary how much they fucking slaughtered in the 2000s. Next up, we have The Code is Red, Long Live the Code, released April 20th, 2005, and honestly, you can just copy-paste everything I said about Order of the Leech and place it here. Yes, there are some guest appearances we could talk about, and yes, there are some experimental ideas still being floated about that we can talk about, but for the most part, this is a repeat of what Order of the Leech did so well, and thank God for it, because holy fuck, this album fucking kills. I don't really feel like repeating myself. I think y'all get the drill by now. It fucking kills. 2000's Napalm Death really was some next level shit. 4.5 out of 5, an incredible fucking record. Minor spoiler alert, the next couple records are also gonna have this score, but this is the video we're making, this is how we're doing it, so let's just play this out. Next up, we have Smear Campaign, released September 15th, 2006 via Century Media Records. It is a concept album criticizing religion in general. Aside from that, it is more of the same from 2000's Napalm Death, and I mean that in the best way fucking possible. Ta-da! 4.5 out of 5. Whew! Oh, man. It really is difficult to talk about these albums at a certain point because they're just all so good, and they're all so good for the exact same fucking reasons. Like, there's only so many times I can tell y'all it's brutal and politically charged and have it retain any fucking meaning. So I apologize if you're looking for more detail, but at this point, I don't really gain anything from doing that. I'm just repeating myself. I'm repeating that I'm repeating myself. Oh my god, 4.5 out of 5. It's incredible. Go listen to it. You get the idea. Just go listen to it. It's incredible. It's a fucking incredible record. Next up, we have Time Waits for No Slave, released January 23rd, 2009, once again via Century Media Records. I will concede that this album is not quite as impactful or as memorable or as powerful as the last couple of records we've talked about. It does feel a little bit more derivative and generic and even predictable, dare I say. It's definitely not as ambitious as The Code is Red or Smear Campaign, but it's still filled with some pretty tasty, tight, semi-modern grindcore jams. I'm feeling a 3.5 out of 5. I'm feeling a 3.5 out of 5 on this bad boy. Yeah. Check it out. Check them all out. I think you can understand by this point that, once again, 2000's Napalm Death is pretty fucking solid. Next up, we have Utilitarian, released February 27th, 2012 via Century Media Records, and this album was one of the first Napalm Death records I listened to after hearing Scum, because this was right around the time I discovered Napalm Death. In fact, it wasn't long after this I saw Napalm Death at the Phoenix Theater opening for Cannibal Corpse, which I'm sure, as you can imagine, was a pretty mind-blowing experience for like an 18, 19-year-old kid, just discovering like death metal and grind and hardcore and extreme metal. Some of the more experimental and progressive ideas that other albums have flirted with are expanded upon more here. There are some spoken word sections, there are some clean vocals, there's even some saxophone stuff being worked into the track Everyday Pox. For a long time, this was one of my favorite Napalm Death records, mostly because it was one of the first I came to know. Had you asked me 10 years ago, I would have given this a 5 out of 5. Nowadays, I think this is closer to a really strong 4 out of 5. Like, there are lots of great songs on here, but I don't think that this is as strong as The Code is Red or Smear Campaign, and of course not as strong as the classic records which we've already discussed. Though I will say, Everyday Pox and The Wolf I Feed fucking kill. Two of Napalm Death's best fucking songs, without fucking question. Next up, we have Apex Predator Easy Meat, released January 23rd, 2015 via Century Media Records. And honest to God, what a bona fide fucking masterpiece. I cannot believe how fucking intense and brutal and intelligent this album is. I mean, my fucking god. All of the experimental flavors of previous records, the groove metal flavors, the alt-rock and alt-metal flavors, the spoken word stuff, the weird syncopated rhythms, and of course the classic grind and death metal flavors have all been brought together. And it's absolutely stunning here. Some of Napalm Death's best lyrics, some of their best compositions. The production is so fucking crazy and so fucking intense that it's genuinely overwhelming at times. Similarly to the first few Napalm Death records, it does a great job at peeling back societal and political scabs without seeming obnoxious, without seeming hyper-preachy. It just kind of feeds off of like negative energy and translates that into some ripping fucking tunes. The diversity, the complexity, the overall ambition of the album's sound and production and design might be a bit too much for people who are looking for straight up fucking grind, but I fucking love this. This is the kind of shit Napalm Death should have been doing in the 90s when they were getting more experimental and alternative. This is as I said before, a fucking masterpiece. So fuck it, 5 out of 5. I think it's a perfect fucking record. There's nothing I would change, nothing I would alter. It's just fucking fantastic from start to finish. I love this fucking record. There are quite a few classic metal bands that can say that they've released a few masterpieces in their lifetime, but none can say that they released one like 30, 40 fucking years past their debut album. Fucking none. That's how fucking fantastic Napalm Death is. That's how fucking fantastic they always will be. God bless you. God bless this album. Holy shit. And finally, this brings us to Throes of Joy in the Jaws of Defeatism, released September 15th, 2020 via Century Media Records. Because I reviewed this last year, I'm going to keep things relatively brief. If you want a more detailed analysis, please feel free to check out that album review. I'll even link it in the description of this video if you like. I stand by everything I said in that video. It is very much an expansion of everything I like about Apex Predator Easy Meat, but not quite as fluid, not quite as cohesive, not quite as well realized or thought out. The post-rock stuff in particular, I feel, could be a lot better implemented and infused into the sound. Though despite that, there are still some great cuts. Smash a Single Digit in particular is a fucking rager. I can't remember off the top of my head what I originally gave the album, but right now I'm feeling a 4 out of 5. It's a great record. A touch of a downgrade in comparison to Apex Predator, but a great record nonetheless. And voila! That is it! Holy fuck, I've actually been recording for a while. I don't know how long the final video is going to be, but I've been here for a bit. I think my camera's literally about to die, so good thing we're done. That's it. What's your favorite Napalm Death record? What's your least favorite Napalm Death record? What are your favorite songs, your least favorite songs? What do you want to hear from them in the future? What do you want to hear from me in the future? Let me know, or don't. Your fucking call, your fucking prerogative. You do with your time whatever you wish. Press this button right here to get updates on the Metal Meltdown fucking immediately in case you somehow aren't already. And as always, ladies and gentlemen, you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.